Uchiha District Training Grounds. Uchiha District Training Grounds. Fire Release Great Fireball Jutsu. As the infamous jutsu of the Uchiha was called out, a stream of fire was released, forming into a large ball of flames that soared towards the direction of the sole wooden post in the area. If the post were to possess a mind of its own, it would have surely cried out in agony, demanding retribution for its fallen comrades over the past few days. They were the unfortunate victims and undeserving sacrifices to a certain young Uchiha. And the reason for their suffering was for merely being in the presence of this particular shinobi while he silently seethed enraged. The youth watched, while lost in his musings, as the training post proceeded to be engulfed in a torrent of raging flames that seemed to show no sign of ending anytime soon. It seemed to reflect the youth's state of mind and emotions at the present time. This village, how could they treat life in such a way? What wrongs could Naruto have possibly committed to deserve the torment he received? What has he done that was so deserving of death? This raven-haired youth continued to stare with his cold, onyx eyes at the post with gnashing teeth and clenched fists. His hair slightly flowing from the breeze that drifted from the release and impact of his jutsu. He wore a simple, yet familiar, high-collared navy shirt. It was a common form of wear among the Uchiha and he was no different. He had bandages taped over his forearms and shins, and wore combat shorts with a tool pouch wrapped around his right leg. His simple appearance did nothing to take away from his charm, however. His stoic demeanor, handsome appearance, and skill in the shinobi arts had left fangirls following his every step, in hopes to discover more about the mysterious pretty boy that was Itachi Uchiha. If Itachi had one fear, it would definitely be this group of individuals that seemed to show no lack of restraint in their praise and fawning over him. The constant stares from the distance that seemed to bore into his skull day to day. The pouring of accumulated saliva and drool whenever he was caught staring into space, supposedly giving off an air of mystery and brooding. Even a short glance from him was enough to get them riled up, enough to set off a chain of squealing and cheering of his various strengths and qualities. A light shiver coursed through his spine at this moment, seemingly able to detect the mention of his being in his continual torture of his fangirls. I feel like someone is discussing one of my greatest fears, Itachi thought very briefly, before returning his focus back onto the nearly charred pole of wood. He could only thank the gods that his skill was rated highly enough, so as to allow him an early graduation and entry into his current team. As the fire began to die down, Itachi began to untense his muscles and relax his facial expression, once more returning the stoic appearance he was famous for. He had long since known about the torment his late friend, Naruto Uzumaki, had suffered. Itachi knew, however, the extent of his beatings were never shared with him. Naruto would sometimes disappear for days, or weeks, before meeting one another again. This time, however, didn't seem to be the case. Naruto was pronounced missing in action after another hunt against him. The difference with this one, was that a couple of grudge-bearing jounin also got involved. He was chased and beaten by the civilians and jounin ninja, until they seemingly had a bright idea. They took the supposed Jinchuriki away from the village towards a large body of flowing water, before dumping him in. The jounins weren't complete idiots. They knew the child wasn't the Kyuubi incarnated. That didn't mean they wouldn't take matters into their own hands to avoid another tragedy. They knew if the boy was killed, the Kyuubi would simply reform, and possibly, seek revenge against Konoha. So they kindly deported him. While there may be a chance he would have died as he was carried by the water, they doubted it would happen. Where this belief came from was uncertain. It was suspicious in fact, but they merely pleaded that they got carried away with the hunt and made a rash decision. Needless to say, they have been stripped of rank and took a trip to the TNI department for a good period of time. They were prohibited from rejoining the shinobi ranks, due to losing a powerful weapon, and possibly releasing a future threat to the village. While Itachi knew Naruto was strong, he knew that he wasn't at the level of competing against jounin quite yet. He released a long breath in an attempt to calm himself before returning home. He did not want to be questioned on his mood and refused to bother his parents with his worries. He usually had Shisu or Naruto, for those kinds of things, but the lacking presence of said shinobi, and one of the people he knew that could be called a true friend within the village, seemed to be the cause for his most recent distress. When his thoughts were directed toward the young Uzumaki, he smiled as he recalled when they first met. It was some time after the birth of his brother and Kyuubi incident that they met, and he had already started attending the academy. It was one of the bigger moments in his life even until now. Flashback, 2 years ago. Our favorite Uchiha prodigy could be seen in the woods presently, training his technique and accuracy in kunai throwing and trajectory control. With closed eyes, he takes in a large breath. In his moment of pause, the sound of the wind breezing through the leaves and the chirping of smaller animals could be heard. This moment, however, lasted for only a few seconds before the child opened his eyes once more. As a clear demonstration of his determination and skill, he flung his kunai into multiple directions. Some bounced and reflected off one another with an audible clang of steel, while others found their place in the target more directly. The sound of contacting steel and whistles in the wind all ended under a couple of seconds. With all of the thrown kunai reaching the otherwise impossible targets he had displaced among the trees and earth. Taking a final look at the status of the targets, he finally released the hold he had on his breath, taking in the fresh air of nature. It was a moment of peace, one he found that he needed with the chaos that seemed to envelope his mind as of late. That was when he heard a whistle of awe among the trees. I was being watched? How did I not sense them? Itachi mused momentarily. Before he decided to act upon his concerns for the mysterious spy, he heard the voice speak from behind a nearby tree. I suppose it's true what the rumors say about you being a prodigy. That's not a skill someone your age usually has. But, I suppose as an heir to the clan, there is some pressure to be the best. As the voice completed his sentence, he stepped out into view to reveal a curious-looking redhead with what appeared to be whisker marks. He was a youth slightly taller than himself with a smirk on his that seemed to display a mischievous nature. He wasn't someone he knew personally, but he had seen him around the village. His name was well known after all, considering the announcement of him being the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Itachi was never one to judge someone's character by something out of their control. From the looks of it, he was around his own age and didn't seem to have any ill intentions. After a moment, he untensed his muscles a bit and moved into a more relaxed and welcoming stance, so as to not put the unexpected visitor on guard. You are Naruto Uzumaki, Jinchuriki of the Nine-Tailed Fox. May I ask what brings you here? Itachi stated in a stoic tone of voice most of his peers would view as off-putting, but Naruto didn't seem to mind as he simply shrugged his shoulders in return. Well, there isn't much to do in a village that basically hates your guts, so I decided to venture around. They tend to keep away from wooded areas for the most part now, since that incident at the Forest of Death, Naruto stated, shaking his head side to side in an obvious bid to showcase his sarcastic and mocking tone. Those poor bastards. Well, persistence is not necessarily a bad quality, but I guess it can sometimes come with a price. There's just happened to be a cave of oversized bears. Compliments to the Anbu though. They must have a really fast response time if they were able to arrive before anyone was eaten or killed. If the casual dismissal of possible death seemed off-putting to Itachi, it didn't show in his expression or body language. In fact, he felt that if someone was willing to perform such degrading acts of assault and battery towards a child, they should be prepared for any repercussions. Itachi didn't seem too interested in the topic, as it was known to quite a number of villagers, so picking this information up wasn't too difficult. He dismissed the topic to voice another question to the, unbeknownst to him, false Jinchuriki. I see. May I ask why you chose to reveal yourself only now? He stated while standing with his arms to the side. He didn't think the Uzumaki came to threaten him in any way, so he adopted a comfortable position. Naruto seemed to ponder for a moment, then ultimately just shrugged his shoulder once more before responding. I was just curious about your skill and didn't want to interrupt. You also seemed to be trying to take your focus off of something, so I just let you brood for a bit until you sensed me. Itachi only nodded in response. Indeed, his mind tended to wander on various subjects of life and death. He wanted to understand many things, like what a shinobi is, what is a village. It boggled him constantly. And he tended to lose focus of his surroundings when he had such habits. It was a habit he had difficulty in correcting and knew it was something that needed to be mended before working as a shinobi. Distractions only lead to death, something he was more than familiar with during the Third Shinobi World War. Naruto seemed to pick up on his brooding mood once again and decided to say something to correct it. Hey kid, you shouldn't be so depressed all the time. You're sure to get wrinkles by the time you're a teenager if you do. Itachi seemed to wake up from his words, and merely nodded in response. He figured Naruto wouldn't be in the way while he continued to train, so he walked over to his kunai that had burrowed into their targets, and proceeded to remove them from their positions back into his tool pouch. While he was reaching for one of his kunai, he stopped for a moment. He thought of something as he turned to Naruto and asked him a question related to his constant troubles. Uzumaki, have you? Before Itachi continued, Naruto swiftly interrupted to correct him. Naruto, just call me Naruto. I already have a mindset of a geezer. I don't need to be referred to like I am one as well. We're the same age, so treat me like it, kid. Although Itachi found it contradictory and ridiculous that Naruto didn't want to be viewed as a geezer, yet called him a kid, he just nodded his head before continuing. Naruto, have you seen the reality of war? Naruto, seeing where the conversation was heading, nodded his head and answered back, you're referring to the Third Shinobi World War, huh? Naruto paused until he received a slow, but near imperceptible nod from Itachi before continuing. I see. Well, what is it you wanted to ask? I'm sure it's what has been bugging you, and asking whether or not I had experienced the tragedies the war brought is not the actual reason, so go ahead. I'll listen. With the last of Kune picked up off the ground, Itachi turned to Naruto fully before answering. I will admit that war has caused me unending thoughts about what it means to be a shinobi. What it means to be a part of the village, but what I wanted to ask was what is a life to you? Naruto sighed audibly at the rather difficult question. It was one that could have many answers, with none being quite correct. He too had thought about this during his days en route, but ultimately came upon one conclusion. It was not a solid one, but it would hold until he found a right one. After a couple moments of silent staring between the two, he finally voiced his thoughts. Itachi, I believe all life has meaning, it just has yet to be found. He noticed that Itachi didn't seem too satisfied by the answer, so he proceeded to walk towards him at a slow pace until he stood before him. All of the constant theories of life and death. The meanings behind a village and shinobi, they are infinite. Considering everyone in this world is unique, it is safe to assume that their thoughts will be equally unique. Not a single person is the same, there will always be a difference among beliefs, hence why I cannot give you a straight answer even if I wanted to. Whatever I believe may not fit what you believe in, and it is never healthy to force yourself to do so. At this, Itachi seemed to bow his head a little in contemplation, but before he could delve any deeper, he felt two fingers prod his forehead, pushing his gaze back onto the redhead. With a genuine smile on his lips, Naruto said, give it time, Itachi, and I'm sure you'll find an answer. Your answer. Not mine or anyone else's. The answer that is unique to yourself, and will remain so until the end of your days. Itachi, for once, smiled at the answer. He truly was overthinking such things, he would admit to that. He had time to find his answer, so there was no sense in rushing. Until then, he will perform his duties to Konoha and become the best he can be, if not for himself, for the sake of others, his parents, and his newborn brother. Seeing the look of realization and recognition on Itachi's face, Naruto slowly retracted his fingers from the Uchiha's forehead before continuing with a playful grin, don't think too much on it. You'll only seem like a brooding brat. Isn't that why your fangirls continue to hunt you down despite any form of resistance you have? I'm starting to think that you're the kind of person that gets off on torture. Naruto chuckled when he saw the look of slight horror on the prodigy's face. I suppose everyone has some form of weakness. This is too funny. An Uchiha elite, intimidated by the mere sight of squealing girls and yipping harlots, all but begging to be in a relationship with him. He chuckled at this thought, before continuing his teasing. If you'd like, I did happen upon this one novel called Icha Icha Bondage Heaven. It details quite the story about someone with tendencies much like yours. He began to laugh a little when he saw the once horrified expression devolve into a much more disturbed one. Itachi uncharacteristically pouted once he realized he was being teased. Being around Naruto just seemed to bring out his more childish side. It was different, and pleasant, knowing he could act his true age around someone. The Uchiha brought a hand to his forehead and rubbed it slightly, remembering how two fingers were once present there. He refocused his eyes onto the culprit and asked, why did you do that? Naruto stopped his short fit of laughter, seemingly confused by the question, before asking for clarification. Do what? Itachi just stared for a moment while rubbing the spot that was targeted by the Uzumaki before him, before re-specifying his curveball of a question. Why did you poke my forehead? This seemed to pause Naruto for a second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds, and on the fourth, he began to chuckle. And after a few more seconds, it evolved in a fit of laughter that left him hunched over and kneeling on the ground. Itachi was unamused, if the twitching of his brow was anything to go by. After a minute or two, Naruto began to calm down, and decided to explain himself to the Uchiha while wiping a tear from his eye, before said Uchiha could become too irritated. Sorry, it's just that after all the deep shit we talked about, you question why I poked you? I was certain you would question my reasoning at the very least. To be honest, I'm still surprised you're talking to me at all, if we're considering my reputation as a Jinchuriki. It was unexpected. You sure know how to keep your priorities straight, nah, Uchiha brat, Naruto finally answered with a short chuckle between words. Itachi looked visibly annoyed at the statement and decided to voice this out. You look to be around my age, so I doubt you have the right to call me a brat. While Itachi continued to look peeved, he was also inwardly happy. Happy that someone saw him as a human being rather than some prodigy so high on a pedestal, beyond the reach of his peers. If there was anyone he could get along with his age, he felt that person would be Naruto. Yeah, whatever brat. Well, to answer your question, I don't know, Naruto responded bluntly. Itachi would have face-faulted if he were not so in control of himself. What is that supposed to mean? Itachi couldn't help but question the answer Naruto gave or lack of one. Scratching his chin, Naruto said, it means what it means. I don't know, I kinda just did it on a whim, but I guess if I had to try to explain it, I guess I wanted to try to get my message across. You know, kind of like projecting my thoughts and feelings onto the tips of my fingers and focus it onto the whirlpool of emotions that was twisting and turning inside of that head of yours. Itachi, unknowingly recontinued his previous ministrations on his forehead, as if to try to understand the feeling. Rather than a technique, I guess it was an act of faith. Faith that you would understand what I meant through contact. Faith that we could understand each other through that one moment of contact. Through this conversation, I felt you and me were similar in some ways, so I believed it would work. So, tell me, did it? Naruto finished with a cheeky grin. Itachi thought about it for a moment. It was a simple physical interaction, but it seemed endearing in a way. Almost as if he could connect Naruto with himself, understand him, and it seemed to send a signal of care, sympathy. Of what, he wasn't sure, but he definitely felt more relaxed and calm after the act. Releasing a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, he spoke back, yes, I think it did. There was a moment of silence, before another voice spoke up, breaking it. It was another Uchiha youth that Itachi seemed to recognize. That's some deep stuff you guys are talking about. I definitely wouldn't have thought there were kids your age that would look so deeply into things. The new entry spoke in a light-hearted tone. Slow in response, but still questioning the presence of his senior, Itachi answered first, Shisu, what are you doing here? The boy merely chuckled in response before answering, I think that's a question better left for you two. Aren't you supposed to be in the academy? Naruto, whose only response to the unexpected entry of the Uchiha was nothing more than a raised eyebrow, only shook his side to side. Not for me. I'm not even enrolled, courtesy of our fantastic council, who believed I would only become a threat if I received proper training, Naruto said in a sarcastic tone in regards to the council. While some protested the decision, feeling that a weapon should be sharpened and honed as the perfect means of deterrence against villages, a majority felt more safe if Naruto did not learn any methods of killing. In fear of any revenge he may exact upon his civilian offenders, little did they know he still trained in secret and had already received high-quality lessons from being with Root, if you considered mentally and physically debilitating torture training. Shisu only chuckled nervously, knowing how the village pariah was treated. He did not feel the same way as others, but was powerless to do anything. He then turned his focus onto Itachi, who shook his head as well, denying the fact. I'm not missing lessons either. He stated confidently, knowing he had a shadow clone taking his place. Naruto seemed to ponder his answer for a moment, before nodding his head in understanding. Ah, I see. You used shadow clonus. I love that technique. It has so many uses, Naruto expressed vocally. He was familiar with the technique, and it really was among his favorites. It served many purposes in training, and he could spam more than the average shinobi due to his Uzumaki heritage having naturally larger chakra reserves. If he was the actual Jinchuriki, he was certain that he could spam possibly thousands of copies, but since that wasn't the case, he was limited to a supply from 10 to 30. Varying in quality depending on how much chakra was used and how many he created. Shaking himself from his thoughts, he noticed that Shisu and Itachi were still talking and decided to join the conversation. They were both interesting people, and he felt like he could get along with them. Neither saw him as the Kyuubi and conversed with him as if he was a normal person. This continued for a while until Itachi felt his shadow clone disperse at the school due to some conflict between students. This situation was also what led to his skills being discovered by the teachers, allowing him an early graduation later in the year. Following the disappearance of his clone, the three young shinobi bid each other farewell, looking forward to another opportunity where they could possibly train together. Flashback end. Following that day, they would meet every so often to train or converse with one another. Due to Naruto's reputation, it did have to be kept a secret since they did not know how their families would react. Naruto could care less, as he just enjoyed having pleasant company for once. Itachi awoke from his reminiscence once he realized that he had trekked home from the training grounds. At the door waiting was his father, Fugaku Uchiha, who looked upon him with a proud smile. Itachi was a true prodigy within the Uchiha clan, so how could he not be proud of his own flesh and blood? He was capable of performing a wide array of jutsu, skilled in taijutsu, stealth, and various other areas of importance for a shinobi. Welcome home, Itachi, Fugaku said with a fatherly tone. Lunch is almost ready, so wash yourself before coming to the table. Itachi nodded in response, but before he could respond back, he was tackled by a short bundle of black hair. This child of unsuppressed joy was his younger brother, Sasuke. He loved his older brother, perhaps more so than his father and mother. Itachi had always looked after him in their parents' absence, and genuinely cared for him. If there was someone Sasuke felt he could trust, it would naturally be his older brother. Itachi, shouted the ecstatic little Uchiha. Can we play today? I'm so bored. Please. As if to express his eagerness, the little Uchiha jumped repeatedly up and down while holding Itachi down in an iron hug. Itachi could only smile solemnly and with regret. Sorry Sasuke, I have a mission after lunch. Maybe another day. Sasuke deflated quickly hearing these words, before he felt a familiar set of fingers press against his forehead. He never understood why, but he always felt warm and safe whenever Itachi did this. Please understand Sasuke, and forgive me. I will surely make time for you another day, Itachi inwardly mused, hoping he got the message across. Sasuke's deflation lasted for only a moment, before he smiled once again at his favorite brother. Okay, but you promised. Now you have to play with me next time, the little Uchiha rebutted firmly. Itachi, Fugaku, and now their mother Mikoto, who had appeared sometime during the conversation, could only laugh at the young Uchiha. Breaking everyone from their thoughts, Mikoto clapped her hands to get their attention. Okay everyone, I've already finished dinner, so come wash up before you eat. With that said, the small family made their way into the house, but not before Itachi sent a pondering glance to the sky behind him, with his last thought being about his red-haired friend. I hope you are well, Naruto. Use a Shiagakure underground tunnel network. All-encompassing darkness was all that existed in this hidden underground chamber. The walls were aged as proven by the growing plantation and large stretch of cracks and crevices among the walls and floors. It appeared fragile and ancient, almost as if it would collapse with a small shock or quake. To the knowledge of no one, these walls have stood for generations, dating back to an era even before the First Shinobi World War, and perhaps even older. Despite its appearance, it had remained sturdy and strong, having stood against the strongest of quakes and turbulent storms. The room itself was a marvel of history, one of which many would give their life to examine. A remnant of time, left only to decay out of reach from the rest of the world. The walls were riddled with seals and markings of ages past that perhaps even the great Jiraiya and Minato Namikaze would be hard-pressed to even read such ancient writing in scriptures. What these seals represented remained unclear, and perhaps would remain so for a long period of time. Within this huge expanse of darkness, a light suddenly began to illuminate in the center of the chamber. Seals began to glow as a familiar figure appeared within. This figure was none other than Naruto Uzumaki. And as quickly as the light came, it had disappeared with a low hum that echoed in the room, seemingly to signify that a set of seals had been activated once more. This left the lone figure with nothing to see but a blanket of black, a darkness so deep his own hands were invisible to his sight. The room, void of sound and furnishings, entered an eerie silence. There was more to this room than meets the eye, something Naruto seemed to realize. For once in the entirety of his journey into Uzashigakure, he felt fear. This fear did not come from his lack of visuals, however. The seals that littered the room was far more complicated than that, and capable of much, much more. What is this? Naruto thought with a cold sweat dripping down his spine. I can't feel anything. There is nothing. What Naruto was experiencing was a technique beyond the capability of anyone that was still living in the world. An ancient sealing jutsu called sensory void prison, also called SV prison for short in the past. It was a technique that struck fear into the hearts of all who heard of it, and even more to the ones who were possessed by the technique. The markings on the walls and floor turned the natural five senses of anyone inside into nothing. An ever-present darkness was all that clouded their vision. All formations of sound was silenced. Taste became nothing and scent was non-existent, and though it was possible to move, the body was numbed of all feeling. Not a touch could be sensed and pain was ignored. Your mind knew it was moving, but your body never felt the actions that took place. It was an absolute prison of the void, taking away the tools all humans used to be aware. It erased what made humans aware of their surroundings and themselves. It blocked out all sources a human used to gather information and experience in their lives. It was a torture to the human mind, for it was capable of leaving any human being with only one feeling: helplessness. You would be left with nothing but your thoughts, which only served to aid your misery. With your whole being taken from you besides your own ability to think, you would constantly be tortured by the loss of your senses, living in fear of becoming nothing as well. As if sensing the distress of the boy, the seals began to brighten once more, forming a path of glowing symbols and characters, as if directing the child. Naruto, taking a moment to calm down and try to assess the situation, watched the seals glow with a wary gaze. While I can't say this isn't suspicious, I don't have much else to work with. This emptiness is terrifying. Naruto tried performing a simple night vision technique or illumination jutsu, but both seemed to fail as well, leaving him even more nervous than before. Shit. He would have hollered if he had been able to make a sound within the void. The seals must be blocking me from projecting chakra outwardly. Naruto's assumption was correct. The seals limited access to one's chakra once they were caught. While it would continue to circulate inside one's body, they would be unable to eject it in order to perform any techniques and jutsu. It also disrupted the flow of chakra, making one incapable of focusing chakra into specific body parts. This made tools like the Byakugan, Sharingan, or any technique that was affiliated with the body useless and impossible to activate. Limited in choice, Naruto took a step onto the path of glowing seals and noticed the immediate change in the environment. He was able to see again. He could feel the motions of his muscles. All of his senses had returned to him, and he was finally able to make out the appearance of the dreary chamber. A bypass seal, Naruto whispered to himself before he continued to follow the path out of the chamber, and into a network of rooms and tunnels. I suppose I don't have much of a choice but to follow the path. There is no way I want to feel whatever that was again. Determined to continue, and with that final thought, Naruto followed the suspicious path of glowing seals out of the chamber into the labyrinth. It was hours before Naruto found himself standing before a large set of doors. The curious thing was that these set of doors looked no different from the ones he had passed before, with the exception of glowing seals. I see, Naruto mused in revelation as he continued to examine the ceiling matrix that seemed present on every inch of the walls and floors when he was moving through the maze. As daunting and horrifying the experience had left him, he understood the potential and capability of such a seal. It was dangerous, and he was all too familiar with what it did. During his journey to the doors before him, he had plenty of time to contemplate and theorize many things about the maze of seals and stone. He couldn't help but believe that the security measures that existed in this place was phenomenal and far above anything he had seen, or even heard of before, as he reflected on his studies. To think something so powerful would be used, I can only imagine what it was meant to protect. He clearly understood that whatever was meant to be protected was significant, and clearly only for the eyes of members within the clan. From what little he could make out in the ceiling matrix on the paths, it had characters for bloodline detection. This meant only those of a bloodline that had gained permission could activate the bypassing seal matrix. As for the ceiling inscriptions that manifested the void, he could understand nothing. There were characters he had yet to see, and they were ordered in a manner so complex he couldn't even read them. He also felt like there was something missing. It wasn't that the matrix itself was missing something, it was more like it was impossible for Naruto to see it. Until he figured out what that was, he could only be left in the dark. There is much more to the art of sealing than I thought. He had also pondered why a maze would be constructed, considering how powerful the seal that had blocked out his senses was. It simply didn't make sense at first, but he felt that he could understand the reasoning a bit. As foolproof as that seal seemed, I'm sure there must have been a way around it. From what I could gather, it was written quite detailed to cater to those senses. He began to theorize. Naruto understood that for any method and form of sealing to work, a thorough understanding was needed to perform the necessary actions. He considered very skilled in matrix comprehension and design, but he could only say that for some of the basic seals, considering Konoha was limited in resources that were related to the art. For a storage seal, you needed to have some understanding of space and containment. A blood seal was even simpler if you treated blood as the key, and the seal as the door. He had much to learn, that much he was aware, and hopefully he would by the end of his journey. This meant that if someone relied on a sense outside of the main five, there was a chance they could still move around without worry. He hypothesized. He wouldn't know for sure until he experimented with it, but first, he would need to be able to decipher it. Naruto turned his focus to the set of doors that glowed with seals he had yet to decipher. Naruto's eyes narrowed, and his muscles tensed. He was unsure of what awaited him beyond those doors. It could be a trap, an unbelievable treasure trove of artifacts and valuables, or it could be nothing at all. A room void of anything with whatever had previously existed inside as nothing more than ashes in a last-ditch effort to prevent outsiders from taking anything of worth. He focused his gaze onto two blood and chakra input seals, both being set on the opposite sides of the door. The seal he had recognized was clear to him, it was the Uzumaki clan symbol. When he turned his attention to the other one, it was a symbol he did not recognize. It appeared to be two squares overlapping the other with the one on top offset a bit to the bottom left corner. Strange, what does this stand for? Naruto pondered in confused frustration. Considering the symbol next to it represents my clan, does this mean there was a branch clan of the Uzumaki? Or did they house another clan much like Konoha does? Naruto's thoughts continued in this manner for a period of time, only ending up with more questions and headaches than he did answers. If there was another clan, how come they hadn't been mentioned before? What happened to them, and where are they now? He continued his thoughts in silent frustration. There's too much out in the open for now. Naruto, forcefully ending his series of questions in unsated curiosity, bit into his thumb, drawing blood. For now, let's just see what happens for the first one. With that lingering thought, he swiped his blood over the symbol of the Uzumaki and placed his hand over it, releasing chakra. Upon this action, the symbols and characters began to glow red, but other than that, nothing had happened. Naruto could only let out a small breath of disappointment as he looked to the other symbol. I guess both need to be activated simultaneously for anything to happen, but I'm not even sure if I would be able to. There was a great chance he could suffer from a powerful seal rejection. The repercussions that came with seal rejection varied on complexity of the seal. If Naruto had a scroll with a blood seal stolen from him and it was forcefully unsealed, at best it would generate a small explosion, thereby blessing the offender's hands and arms with second or third degree burns. With a seal this complex, the whole building might collapse, crushing his entire body and leaving his existence as nothing more than a memory. Buried with him would be whatever treasure lead beyond the door, never to be found by another ever again. Despite the inherent risk, Naruto had already made his decision. He was determined to find whatever this thing of value was, and was willing to give his life for it. He understood that there would be some who would be sad for his death. But he simply couldn't let this opportunity pass. He was an Uzumaki, and they were individuals stubborn down to their blood and bones. It was their inherent nature, and while he wouldn't be as pronounced in this behavior like most Uzumaki were, it did not mean he still didn't possess this trait. It was only subdued thanks to Danzo's training, allowing him more control of his actions. He had come so far already, and he was not willing to turn back. The truth behind his heritage was always a question of concern for him since he was given a book on the Uzumaki by Danzo. He knew Danzo was never one for charity, and he had reasons for giving the book to him, reasons he was aware of the moment it was handed to him. The book was small and protected by a seal that would only allow the eyes of an Uzumaki to bear witness to. There was not much in the small book, but it did mention some legends and history of their clan. It mentioned their belief in the will of water and what it entailed, as well as what they were famous for. Unfortunately for him, and much to Danzo's disappointment, there were no passages that went more in depth into seal construction and design. Perhaps they existed once within the torn pages, but there was no way to tell now. He had to thank Danzo for such a generous gift though. Before he had received the book, he had been in a dark place, with various circumstances fighting against him. He truly was close to becoming the emotionless husk Danzo had always desired, but it had changed the moment he received that book. The book became a hope and dream for him. He had always lived within the confines of Root, only seeing the light of day a few times, and that was during a mission. It was before the armistice of the Third Shinobi World War, so there was plenty of chaos and bloodshed to go around, something Itachi could attest to. It was the source of his trauma and desire for peace after all. The will of water was a belief in freedom and family, things he did not have and most desired. Rather than sit back and hope for the day to come, he would plow his way through with a will that would put most veteran shinobi to shame. It was a stubbornness capable of contending with the temper of Kushina Uzumaki. A fire had been lit in his eyes that day as he continued to read the legends and tales of his clan. He would fight for his freedom to his last breath, and that was a promise of a lifetime. I don't plan to leave this place empty-handed. Naruto took a deep breath before biting into his other thumb, drawing blood once more. I can only hope they were connected to my family in some way. Well, here goes everything. With that last thought, performed the same action he did the other seal. For a moment, there was nothing until the seal began to glow blue. For a moment, he was ecstatic that he had succeeded until he felt that he couldn't remove his hands from the seals. The problem began when Naruto began to feel a strong pull on his chakra network. The seal was quickly draining him of his chakra, which would normally not be an easy feat for an Uzumaki. Somehow though, the door seemed to drink his chakra faster than a human could swallow water. At this point, Naruto was cringing in pain, heaving for air as he felt the strain on his chakra network. He was losing too much, too fast, and he could feel every bit of it. This continued to worsen as the two seals then began to expand their light across the door, tracing each character and symbol. As the complexity of the sealing matrix grew and the light stretched across, so did the amount of pain Naruto felt. Damn it! Naruto screamed in his head. He was experiencing a pain he had yet to experience before. He was used to tolerating physical pain, but never had he felt something like this. His chakra network was getting attacked directly, devouring whatever chakra his Tenketsu points had flowing, down to the last drop. This was worse than any technique a Hyuga would be capable of tenfold. Chakra was a combination of physical and spiritual energies, used in conjunction to create miracles that would otherwise be impossible for a normal human. So it wasn't just physical pain he was feeling, he felt like his soul itself was going to be devoured. This was almost the exact opposite of what he felt when his senses were blocked. Pain coursed through every inch of his body. He could hear a sharp ringing in his ears that managed to make them bleed. He had tears of blood streaming from his eyes as he witnessed the happenings on his body and the door with tunneled vision. His tongue was numbed from the pain, and he could smell the iron of the blood pouring from the orifices of his body. Fuck this. I'm not going to be killed by some fucking door. Naruto had all but yelled out his determination to resist the pull on his energy. As if reading the Uzumaki's determination, the markings began to glow in a bright flash of white, blinding Naruto and lighting the darkness of the labyrinth. Once the light died down, Naruto began to feel the door creak open with the weight he had pressed against it. When it had opened fully, Naruto had stumbled in with short staggered steps. His knees were weak and everything else felt completely drained. Naruto knew he was on his last legs, but he had to see if this was worth the effort and pain he suffered. What he saw before him was an ancient-looking pedestal with two scrolls over it. They seemed to float above the pedestal, as if to demonstrate their value as some sort of divine item. The one to the left-hand side was a black scroll with his clan crest in white over it, while the other was a white scroll with the crest he had yet to discover in black. Naruto let out a short, strained chuckle. Between panting breaths, Naruto spoke to the scrolls as if they could understand him. "Hey, I really hope you were worth it." With those last words spoken, Naruto collapsed forward, slipping into a silent state of unconsciousness. Kanehagakure Hokage's office. Huh. With an exasperated sigh, a blond man could be seen seated behind a desk riddled with papers and scrolls. This man was none other the fourth Hokage and the infamous Yellow Flash, Minato Namikaze. He was now struggling with an opponent that seemed to bring nothing but endless torture of boredom, and it was a fight that was passed down from his predecessors before him. Paperwork. Hearing a knock at the door, Minato turns his attention away from the hell that was paperwork in favor of another job, a distraction anything but the endless abyss and torture that was paper. "Come in," he stated simply while staring at the remaining stack nightmares that needed to be processed. He could only thank the gods that there was no such thing as a paper jutsu. They would become the public enemies of any Kage or high official if their existence were to be known. He may have a heart attack just from seeing a jutsu like that in action. A Megacure Tower. Achoo! A light and subdued sneeze could be heard within the dreary tower of the rain village. The source of which the sneeze came from was a blue-haired figure garbed in a black cloak with red clouds. She was above average in height for a woman with piercing amber eyes, lined with lavender eyeshadow. Below her lip was a piercing, and adorning her hair into a bun was a large, light blue paper flower. Her nails were dressed with orange polish and she wore a ring with the kanji character for white on her right middle finger. She brushed her nose lightly in response to her sneeze and thought to herself, "Strange, I do not feel sick, nor have I been sick for a while from what I can recall. How curious." Quickly getting over her curiosity from the unexpected bodily action, she proceeded down the hall to report her most recent mission to the leader of her village. He was impatient, and things became difficult when he was irritated, especially when it concerned their search. She could only hope he won't be too disappointed with the results. A shiver suddenly went down the blonde Hokage's spine for a moment before he regained his posture. That was strange, he thought. It was almost as if I just jinxed myself. Before Minato could continue his pondering, his attention changed gears the moment a cough was heard. In front of him were two redheads that he was all too familiar with and happy to see. The first figure was the red-hot-blooded habanero of the leaf and his wife, Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze. She wore a simple green loose-fitted dress over a white high-collared blouse. Her attire, though, did nothing to hide her slender figure and beauty. She had long red hair that came down past her waist, with two shoulder-length strands that framed the sides of her face and over her shoulders. Her skin was fair, and her violet eyes had a mesmerizing shine to them. Unless you were a victim to her fury in the past, you would see her as nothing more than a model of a woman. Beside her was the daughter of the two, and true Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, Mito Uzumaki Namikaze. She was a carbon copy of Kushina in appearance for those that had seen her in her youth. Her temper was equally similar, though a bit more subdued due to the more collected nature of Minato. The only difference from her mother that could be noticed is that her hair seemed a bit more untamed like her father's. And her eyes radiated a light of cerulean that was easily more catching to the hearts and eyes of others in comparison to her parents. Her face was round, as was fitting for a young girl her age. This was something Kushina, however, knew would become a problem. It would definitely become the cause for a certain nickname Kushina had once been tortured by Tomato. Despite this, she was certain to grow into a beauty of renown throughout the village, a thought that seemed to trouble her father every time he became aware of it. "She's not ready to show interest in boys yet," he pronounced inwardly. It was more of a declaration than an opinion, but he could care less though. He felt that he had the right as her father. In his mind at least. Daddy, the young, second coming of the tomato, had all but hollered before making a blind rush to her father, glomping his chest in the process. Minato, who had already moved away from his desk to greet his family, returned her tackle with a hug of his own before picking her up and holding her in his arms. He returned her excitement with a smile of genuine happiness and love. "How are you, little red? What brings you here?" She snuggled into his arms with a smile of her own before responding. "We missed you, Daddy. And Mama said she wanted to ask you something too, so she said we could visit." She turned her eyes to meet with her father's, before they widened with an innocent light in them and asked him, "We can be here, right, Daddy?" "Oh no," thought her father with a cold sweat he felt like never before. He hadn't been this nervous since the Third Shinobi World War. She has learned the eyes. It is probably important to take this time to explain the technique that Minato Namikaze has shown such fear towards. It is a technique that has existed through eons of time and has yet to lose in effect and efficiency. It was said to be the most overbearing of techniques in terms of persuasion, and has gone by many names throughout the ages. They have been called baby face or crocodile tears. It has more commonly been referred to as the puppy eyes, but has recently garnered a new nickname most fitting for its recent evolution and potency. It has now coined the term, the pout of power. It is a look that demands leniency and strikes someone deep into their heart, forcefully wringing out feelings of guilt and submission. It is difficult to counter simply because it compels individuals with raw innocence and cuteness, to the extent that it becomes endearing and plays the strings of one's heart like a harp, lulling them into the desired actions of the caster. It was a skill of puppetry and manipulation that would put Sasori of the Red Sand to shame. With no malice present, an individual will naturally not have their guard up to prepare themselves for such a technique. The reason why it has evolved in naming from the puppy eyes to the pout of power is because it now involves physical action and expression. This is typically done with a quivering lip or softly grabbing onto the victim with a begging clutch. The effectiveness has been known to increase tenfold when physical interaction is involved, so it was determined by professionals to best resolve anything before it had ever reached that stage. The dangerous part was that even with repeated use, the quality of its effect never dwindles. That is the horror Minato had feared and still does to this day, as every sucker for adorableness should be. It was their greatest weakness. That, my friends, is the power of the eyes. Returning our focus back to Minato, when he noticed his daughter's lip begin to quiver, he knew he had to respond and fast. Of course, sweetheart. There is not a time of day you can't visit me. My doors will always be open for you, he responded quicker than a flash of the Hiraishin. At this, Mito gave her father a knowing look and smiled mischievously, seemingly aware of her actions, not that her father noticed. He was too focused on convincing his daughter that he cared for and missed her equally as much. She would have to thank mommy later for teaching her. With a smile of her own, she gave her father a kiss on the cheek. Thanks daddy, I love you. Kushina, who had been watching the entire exchange, could only giggle mysteriously. Knowing that she was the one responsible for giving her daughter the weapon that was the bane of every man's existence. As the conversation between the two began to die down, so too did the smile on Kushina's face. The reason for that was also the reason why she was here and wanted to speak with Minato. She initially didn't plan to bring Mito since the conversation would be pretty serious. Unfortunately, Mikoto was too busy to watch over Mito for her, and anyone else she knew was either busy or away on a mission. She could only hope that Mito would not ask too many complicated questions. Minato seemed to notice the slight shift in the atmosphere around Kushina, and sent her a worried glance of his own. Kushi, is there something bothering you? Kushina turned her gaze downward for a moment, pondering on what she should say exactly. Finding the words she wanted to ask, she voiced them in an audibly soft tone only one within close proximity could hear. Do you know if there was any news about him yet? Minato frowned at the question, showcasing his own distress since he knew what she was talking about. He could only shake his head to her. Catching her look of sadness and disappointment, he tried to soothe her worries. I'm sorry, I have Anbu out there looking for him right now with Kakashi leading them. He was determined to find him too, so I know it will only be a matter of time. Kushina. This seemed to erase some of her worries, but a look of shame combined with sadness was still existent on her face. I just feel so guilty, Minato. She stated her concerns bluntly, hoping to relieve some of the stress she had been withholding for a while now. We are from the same clan, yet I abandoned him. This is not how our people were, Minato. We looked after and loved one another. This betrayal eats at me every day. With that final burst of emotion, she began to tear up. Minato had known how much torture it had been for her. She would be sleepless during the night at times, and the bags under her eyes showed how tired she truly was. Kushina was a kind person at heart and never wanted things to turn out the way they did. In a moment of weakness, Danzo had been able to coerce them into choosing their daughter over him. Sacrificing another child for their own, while it was understandable to some extent, had left a bad taste in their mouth. When they finally caught wind of the reports concerning his past incidents, they were furious to say the least. Minato, how did we not see the way he was mistreated? We knew he would suffer from neglect, but the reports said he was abused and beaten, sometimes into a bloody pulp. How could this happen? While she still had an expression of sadness and her tone was low, it was obvious she was both curious and suspicious. I understand what you're saying, Kushi. It seems some information was withdrawn from us purposely, and I have a feeling Danzo may be involved. Unfortunately, my investigation team was unable to draw anything from the case. There is also the chance that the reporters may be biased against the fox. Alosi escaped his lips, as if to express his helplessness with the situation. There is too much going on at once, Kushina, and I'm afraid discovering anything may be a lost cause. I'm certain he is alive out there. Kushina just bit her lips at the knowledge that her fellow clan member wouldn't receive the proper justice he deserved. Though, she was at fault in the first place for falling to Danzo's poisonous words. I really hope so. Naruto doesn't deserve the treatment he has received so far. I want to at least apologize, for whatever it's worth, and do something to make it up to him. Hearing the name Naruto, Mito, who had dozed off sometime in the beginning of the conversation, rubbed her eyes awake and seemed to jerk straight up. Wudo? She questioned while mispronouncing the name slightly. Are we going to Haven Ramen again, mommy? I really love fish cakes. Dissipating the solemn mood with her cheeriness, Minato and Kushina began to chuckle, with the latter wiping her eyes of any tears that had formed in the previous conversation. They quickly formed smiles on their faces to avoid worrying their child. I wish I could marry fish cakes. Do you think I can, Mommy? Mito continued with an excited voice. At that moment, Minato seemed to freeze as his fatherly instincts seemed to kick into overdrive. No, she is talking about food, not a certain male redhead, you know, Minato. Get a hold of yourself. In a bid to stray away from the idea of marriage, Minato continued this internal conflict he was having with himself. While Kushina began to laugh a little louder at the look of horror that seemed to appear on her husband's face. If there were few things that could scare a man, one of them would be another man taking away the heart of their little girl. Oh, I'm sure you can mini me too. Kushina said with a knowing look at her husband that only seemed to amplify Minato's growing internal struggle. Mito seemed to pout at the nickname. She knew she looked like miniature version of her mom, but she didn't have to remark her height as well. It was a touchy subject for her. Kushina continued after turning her focus back onto her daughter. Sorry honey, but we weren't talking about ramen. We were talking about a boy whose name is Naruto. He's currently away from the village right now. She stopped for a moment with a sad look, before quickly correcting herself so her daughter couldn't detect it. But I'm sure he will be back. He's an Uzumaki with red hair just like you and I, and we were always known to be stubborn, she finished with a smile. Mito seemed to contemplate her words, adopting a thoughtful and concentrated look, well, as concentrated as anyone her age could be. Apparently remembering something, she clapped her hands together as if finally remembering what it was. Oh, you mean Big Brother Whiskers. At that moment, time seemed to stop for the two older shinobi in the room. Kushina was the first to break the silence and ask curiously, Mito, do you happen to know who I am talking about? Mito nodded her head exaggeratedly in response. Of course. When mommy and daddy are not home, I go visit old man Tucci and big sis Aim. I see him sometimes, but we never talked. Kushina nodded at her daughter's response, before the little redhead continued her tale. I like it when he's there. He always buys me ramen before he leaves. She exclaimed happily before adorning a slightly confused expression. But big sis Aim always acts strange around him. Her face turns red a lot. She then drew closer to her mother, as if she was telling some sort of big secret. She whispered once her mother was in close proximity, I think big sis Aim is allergic to Naruto, but doesn't want to tell him to make him feel bad. Kushina could only giggle at her daughter's silliness and innocence. Oh, how it was to be young and have your first crush. Little Mito, she's not allergic to him. It just means she likes him. Confused for only a moment, Mito seemed to understand after a moment of thinking. I agree. I like him too. At this, Minato felt like he would begin to cough out blood in response to such blasphemy. There is no way my little girl has her first crush already, it's too soon. I'm not ready to be a grandfather. Minato began to lose himself in his thoughts, seemingly forgetting that Mito still wasn't of marrying age. That's right. She must be thinking we are still talking about food. That has to be it. In order to relieve his worries, he glanced to Mito to see the look on her face, and almost immediately regretted it. A slightly red hue that was apparent to both Kushina and Minato appeared on the young Uzumaki's cheeks. She fidgeted slightly and seemed a tad bit flustered. It was the next words though that seemed to empty Minato of his soul. Plus Mito seemed to stop for a moment before placing a hand to her heated cheeks. He looks kinda cool, she finished with a slight glimmer of admiration in her eyes, not realizing the damage she was doing to her father. Kushina openly, and loudly, laughed at this. It was loud enough that Minato was sure that his secretary in the floors below was able to hear her. With dull eyes, Minato was left with only one thing in mind. I'm sorry Naruto, but I kind of hope you don't come back. I pray for your safety and continued separation from my daughter. Use a Shiagakure hidden chamber. There was a stern peace inside the recently unlocked chamber. It was an eerie calm that was enough to put anyone on edge. There was a light chill within the room as silence reigned in. At least, silence did reign the interior of the chamber. That is, until a figure with a familiar mop of red hair began to awaken from their temporary comatose state of slumber. A shiver ran through his body, feeling the cold chill of the room pass through his senses. It was a slow process, but he began to raise his body from the floor, leaning against the now open doors for support until he became more aware of his situation. God, my aching everything. He spoke to himself, feeling the repercussions from his most recent endeavor. He could feel pain within every cell of his body, but noted that it seemed quite subdued in comparison to what he had felt before. It was a while before he was able to form any sort of productive action. He was still against the door for a while, attempting to rush the healing of his body through distributing his chakra into his muscles, organs, and tenketsu points. It was a slow process, but he knew he would be incapacitated until he was able to take care of his body. What slowed the process even further was the fact that he lacked any nourishment for a few days now, and though he had trained to starve himself for extended periods of time, it was an unhealthy course of action and could negatively affect his growth. He was still extremely lacking in chakra as well due to most of it being drained, and he knew the recovery of it all would take some time. It was shocking to him considering how he had never felt so drained, due in part to his unique bloodline, but he supposed nothing was truly impossible in the world. His adventure through the tunnels and bout with the torturous door seemed to only prove these thoughts. It was a very long while, perhaps half a day before he felt he was capable of moving without pain, so he decided to take a closer look in his surroundings. The chamber itself didn't seem too different from where he started, but the difference lay in what was in the room. As he had recalled before passing out, there was an ancient-looking pedestal before him with scrolls of differing colors that seemed to levitate from its position. He proceeded to approach the curious-looking items, grabbing them from their position and examined them more closely. To his left was a black scroll the same size and thickness of his forearm, and it seemed to have a blood seal array surrounding the white symbol of his clan that was also imprinted onto the scroll. Turning his head to the right, he saw a scroll similar in size but opposing in color. It was white along with the black imprint of the mysterious clan symbol he had seen before. Surrounding the symbol was a sealing array slightly more complex than the other. There were 2 rings of seals that seemed to surround the clan crest. His curiosity and excitement began to eat at him as he pondered the mystery of the scrolls, and before he decided to take any sort of action, he was interrupted by a harsh growl from his stomach. Naruto turned his curious gaze into a sharp, cold glare towards his stomach, seemingly because he felt betrayed by his natural bodily function. "You traitor," he thought to himself. As much as he wanted to take in his hard-earned prize, he was aware of his current situation. He was starving in an empty chamber with no exits in sight. If he did not escape soon, he would die here. He cursed the human body and their needs for survival before pondering his situation. If I want to live long enough to read what is inside the scrolls, I'm going to have to find a way out of here. But huh. And before he could finish his thought, a sealing matrix appeared suddenly on the pedestal that previously hosted the 2 scrolls, before flashing a familiar blinding light. This happened for a moment before the room adopted its previous state of darkness and solitude. In a flash of light, Naruto found himself in the ruins of the library had he been inside of before his journey into the tunnels and chambers. The sun was high in the sky showing signs of falling, signifying more than half of the day was over. His face was currently blank as he was starting to question his sanity. I swear there is a conscience in that labyrinth. There are just way too many coincidences going on in there. He would have continued his analysis of the chamber if it weren't for a familiar sound of growling that came from his stomach. Focusing his eyes onto the 2 scrolls that were in his hands currently, he sighed in exasperation before tucking them away into a storage seal he had on his arm. Stretching his still sore muscles and bones, he began to move away from the ruins in an effort to fulfill his needs to survive. All right. Let's find some food before settling down and doing anything else. It was later in the day now and approaching the evening if the sun gaining an orange and purplish hue was any sort of evidence to go by. Naruto could be found seated around a small fire he started not long ago with several fish being cooked on sticks. There were not many resources to work with on a ruined island such as this, but if there was one good thing about being surrounded by a large body of water, it was the excess amount of fish. He had also found a source of fresh water on the island, which he supposed should have been obvious. There was no way there could have been an island full of people without some form of fresh water, and importing such a basic need seemed pretty stupid if he might say so himself. He was just finishing his 23rd serving of cooked fish before sitting down with a content look on his face. He was not sure how long he was incapacitated for, considering he had washed up onto the coastline of the village for a time in his most recent knockout from the door of hell. Judging by the amount he ate, he had assumed it might have been quite a while, days even. It was hard to tell the passing of time without any source for doing so other than the sun. He then proceeded to unseal one of the scrolls he had locked away, summoning the first one that had caught his attention. He held the black Uzumaki scroll in his hands before taking a long, deep breath. He couldn't deny that he was excited to see what was inside. It was something he had desired for a long time. He would be the first one ever since the time of his clan's destruction to perhaps even see the scroll, let alone read it or be aware of its existence. He bit into his thumb, forming a few drops of blood before he swiped it over his crest mark, and the scroll began to glow a low, dark light before disappearing all at once. He had to say it was a bit anticlimactic. He assumed some legendary being would be released or some great weapon would form, but he supposed that was his rare childish side taking over. He peeled back the edge of the scroll, opening it a bit, and came upon a thought-provoking sentence that seemed to be the name of the scroll. He read aloud, "Scroll of Origin, Foundation of Yin." It was a curious title, but he did not seem to form any deeper thoughts before opening the scroll further to read whatever else was inside. He was sure he would come to understand it more if he read through the content first. He was unsurprised by the content, if not a little disappointed to say the least. For the first half of the scroll, it had various sealing designs and names and may or may not have heard of before. They started off from the simple storage and blood seals, to various styles of barriers and arts that each served a different and unique purpose. He did note that there were differences in design that actually heavily improved their effectiveness. The storage seal could store more and the blood seals would only release if it came directly from the person. This avoided in robberies from people who managed to get a drop of their blood. It was amazing, but he almost wanted there to be something more fantastic, fantasy-like even. He supposed though this was the reality of the world though that was, until he came upon a technique that seemed horrifyingly familiar as he read every word. Sensory void prison. A product of many years of study, research, and experimentation into the human anatomy has resulted in what many deem the most inhumane and disturbing of techniques. Naruto gulped audibly when he read the short description of the technique before continuing with the passage. A large canvas is required in order to draw the necessary characters and patterns for the seals, and mastery in micro-sealing is imperative. Naruto paused once more, pondering the term that had yet to come up before. Micro-sealing? I've never heard of such a thing. Was that what I couldn't see before when I was trying to study it? He pondered this for another moment, before deciding to continue his reading. When a subject enters the presence of the seal, immediate effect is taken place. As the name implies, the subject enters a state where he loses all of his senses, except the ability to think. This begins to torture the subject, slowly degrading their sanity. Past examples were known to perform incredibly demeaning, degrading, and harmful acts upon themselves, in an effort to regain feeling. All subjects died in the end, and were not blessed to even feel pain when they were released from their misery. Naruto could now be seen shivering at the thought. A technique such as this was diabolical, perhaps even evil, but he couldn't help this natural interest he had in its creation. A thought seemed to appear in his mind, and he shockingly found that he didn't mind thinking this way. I want this, I want to learn it. The power of this technique was terrifying to say the least, and could be used as a useful deterrent in some cases. He decided to continue reading the passage to the end for any more information he could use. This technique was developed for the sake of imprisoning the worst of criminals when death was determined as too light of a punishment. It also served as a tool of interrogation, breaking the mind of any subject who had entered. Naruto could understand its uses, but it was the next line that shocked him the most. This technique has yet to be completed. This technique was not complete? If his mind wasn't blown already from what he had read earlier, it had surely exploded now. He truly had this strong desire to make this technique his in every way, evolve it, and refine it to be used as the perfect weapon. Breaking himself out of his drunken stupor of excitement, and continued down the scroll. He gave a passing glance at the names of different techniques that were all powerful in their own right. The section soon changed from sealing techniques, to different methods of sealing. It wasn't a large list, but he did recognize that micro-sealing had been mentioned. Essentially it revolved around the principle of writing out a sealing array and compressing it onto a single line or character. It was an incredibly flexible and powerful art. He was certain that if Danzo had ever caught wind of such a method, the seals that existed on all tongues of the root members would certainly be more potent and serve their original design much more effectively. It was a scary thought, but as long as Naruto didn't spread the information himself, he was safe. There were also other methods that caught his eye, like three-dimensional sealing or animate sealing, but he decided to give them a better read later on. Though it was a great feeling having learned that there were so many styles of sealing, as well as powerful techniques. He didn't think anything was so shocking that it deserved to be preserved so strongly, that was, until he came upon a final discovery. Near the end of the scroll, there was a passage that detailed his clan a bit more. It was the first mention of his clan throughout the entire scroll, so his attention was caught immediately. The content itself, though, brought a dumbfounded expression onto his face. The passage read, "To the successor of the scroll. The history of the Uzumaki dates back to a time that followed the sealing of the living deity and progenitor of chakra Kaguya Otsutsuki. The Uzumaki clan are living descendants of her sons Hamura and Hagoromo Otsutsuki, though because we were not more skilled in the more appealing arts like jutsu or genjutsu, we were kept in the shadows. For ages this continued while the sons of Hagoromo battled each other through conflicting opinions on peace. This stretched even beyond their time, as the reincarnations of Indra and Asura continue this tradition, even possibly until your present time. For years our clan lived in the shadows until I came upon 3 great revelations that pushed our clan forward into heights that were capable of overthrowing even the prowess of the 2 reincarnates. A prowess and skill that was once able to seal even the primordial entity that was the 10-tailed beast. Our first revelation came in the form of Funjutsu, or better known as the sealing arts. We have long since studied this mysterious art and discovered that it was very flexible and versatile of what it could do. Things that were otherwise impossible with ninjutsu was given form through the sealing arts. Our clan, for an unknown reason at the time, was capable of deciphering the language and pattern of seals and their characters. This mystery became unknown to us until another discovery was made. It came in the form and technique we now claim as a bloodline limit adamantine sealing chains. Unknown to the general populace, there was more to this technique than meets the eye. It was with this knowledge and further research that I came upon the second revelation, and it was one I kept a secret from my brethren even until my death. The Uzumaki did not specialize in the sealing arts. The moment Naruto read this, he froze. What did this mean? How could their clan not specialize in the art? It was a form they were known to use through the ages for combat, and was the reason why they had become feared. It was the reason they met an unfortunate fate that led to their total destruction. He was dying to know the answer, and the next words did not disappoint. We fooled ourselves into thinking we specialized in the art because we were capable of understanding it easier than others. I had always felt that this case was always lacking a reason, and once the development of the adamantine sealing chains came into existence, I knew I had found the answer. The Uzumaki had been gifted an unnaturally high affinity towards the yin release. I found that the theory behind this art was incredibly vast, infinite even. Yin release was a form that governed imagination. It is through yin release that form could be created from nothing. It was this that made us specialize in the sealing arts. Sealing itself was a medium used to create miracles with yin release, but really skilled Uzumaki were able to project these abilities without the use of seals. The adamantine sealing chains was the perfect example of this. Chakra was granted the form of chains with an ability to suppress opponents at the level of tailed beasts. Reading up to there, Naruto now understood what made his clan truly scary potential. His clan was capable of so much more than just the sealing arts, but they were not aware of it. They most likely thought that sealing was their bloodline ability, and their ability to create chains from nothing was just a physical manifestation of it. So much potential was wasted because of a misunderstanding. It was obvious that the person who wrote the scroll did not speak of this to anyone, and it was for the right reasons. It was dangerous knowledge, one that was capable of turning the world against their clan out of fear, not that it mattered much since whatever was left of his clan had scattered across the nations. If what this person said was true, the Uzumaki were capable of creating far more than just chains, and their limit only reached as far as their imagination and skill did. Not considering the needed chakra usage, of course. To have the ability to give form to anything from nothing was a near godlike ability, but he knew he was nothing of the sort, at least, not yet anyway. This was the sort of strength he had been seeking, the strength he needed to fight back against all odds and protect himself and his future. With renewed vigor, and continued to read in order to find out the last revelation, he had no doubt he was ready for an even bigger surprise. The discovery of Yun release was a huge step in my development, and it was also what led me to discover the final revelation. It was a revelation that brought our own clan to greater heights in our efficiency in battle. The final revelation was the formation of the Kami clan. You are not yet ready to learn of the Kami clan, I'm afraid. Not yet, at least. Naruto couldn't help but release an expression of disappointment, before perking up at the following words. I can assure you though, that if you are able to unseal the other scroll, you will understand. The fact that you were able to unlock the door that kept the scrolls hidden away proves that you are destined to release it. However, you must first study the material of this scroll. You will need great knowledge in micro-sealing, as well as develop your abilities in Yun release. I have not bothered with listing any Yun release techniques since they are based on one's imagination. You will be given the methods to bring about such a miracle, but you will ultimately be the one to create your own techniques. These things are challenging and will take time. I suggest you seclude yourself for a period of time for training, as I have done. It took me 10 years to master the techniques in the scroll, something I'm sure you will be capable of doing, if not surpassing me. You would be the first to have read these scrolls, and I pray the knowledge will be able to assist you further along into the future. Please bring our clan into a brighter future of success and security. The founder and first clan head of the Uzumaki clan, Oze Uzumaki. Naruto could feel his heart pulsing, wanting to burst out, but incapable of doing so. There was just too much information at once, he didn't know how to take it. He finally learned what his people were truly capable of, and he was probably the only one who was aware of this. His body shook in excitement and anticipation, and he was extremely eager to learn the materials of this scroll. He then turned his attention to the white scroll with the symbol he now knew represented the Kami clan. Training in seclusion, huh? He thought to himself. If he ever wanted to know what was inside that scroll, he knew it would take quite a bit of time. He was well aware of his current position within Konoha. If he returned, all that would await him was further suffering and more watchful eyes, something he couldn't afford to have. His affinity for Yun release and knowledge of powerful sealing techniques and methods is a secret he must keep at all cost from Konoha, especially from Danzo. It was obvious the knowledge would be used selfishly or to put others in danger. He would then become a breeding horse for the village, forsaking the future of any children he created. It was a life he would not deign to do, especially against children of his own. He knew his friends in Konoha may miss him, but Naruto also knew he didn't belong there. He had a feeling in his gut he was never a native to Konoha. He may stop by in secret or develop a spy network there in the future, but he refused to live there. A home was a place you felt safe and loved, and he could not call a place that tortured him out of false spite a home. He closed his eyes and inhaling a deep gust of chilling air. It was dark now, and the cool breeze could be felt and only the crackling sound of a dying fire could be heard before him. He had just made possibly the easiest decision he ever had in his entire life. Opening his eyes, he whispered to no one in particular with a calm, peaceful expression adorning his face and smiled. Sorry guys, but I've always wanted to be free from that place, and now I have that chance. He stopped speaking, before he turned his gaze to the stars in the night sky. I'm afraid Konoha is no longer my home, if it ever was in the first place. I'll be sure to visit in the future, but for now this is goodbye. A Megacure Tower. The village hidden in the rain was rightfully named so, like all of the other hidden villages. It was an endless downpour of water that only broke this cycle on Sunday. This was a tribute done by a figure that could be seen seated on the tallest tower of the village, a place where Hanzo the salamander had once resided. The face of the tower was disturbing in appearance, literally forming a face on one side with a tongue protruding from its mouth. The eyes this face bore were purple with black-lined ripples within, very much similar to the eyes of the orange-haired figure that sat on the edge of the tongue. His face was littered with a rod-like piercing through his nose, and several studded ones with a long bar going through his ear. He had a fang-like piercing below his lip, and a gaze that seemed to express no emotions whatsoever. Pine. The man, now named Pine, turned his attention to the voice of a woman he had grown to be very familiar with through the years. There, he saw a beautiful woman with a large paper flower holding her blue hair in a bun to the side. Her piercing amber eyes looked upon Pine, waiting to be recognized. Have you found anything, Conan? The now named Conan merely shook her head in response. Seemingly no longer interested, he turned his attention away from her back to the horizon of his village. I see. Conan's expression had faltered slightly into one of sadness before correcting back into her neutral expression. It was saddening to see what had become of Nagato, though, she could understand. She felt the same amount of pain he had, if not more. They had lost too much, and they felt happiness was nothing but a dream for them now. I see you two are now together. Might I ask what it was you were searching for, Pine, Conan? Pine now changed his focus upon the new entry. It was a man with a tuft of black hair, garbed in a similar cloak of black and red clouds. His face covered by a spiraling orange mask, with an opening to the right that revealed a dojutsu well known by all the Sharingan. Pine was quiet for a moment before he decided to answer back. We were searching for potential members to join our cause, Madara. This figure was none other than Madara Uchiha, at least, that was what he wanted people to believe. Not caring too much about the subject, Madara responded in kind. Please, refer to me as Toby from now on. My identity is not something to be revealed quite yet, and to solve your little problem, I have a few prospects that may be worth looking into. That seemed to catch Pine's attention as he now locked eyes with the masked figure. Toby continued, you will hunt down a man by the name of Kakuzu. He is said to be an immortal that had even fought the first Hokage in the past. He has experience beyond his time, and is good at collecting money from high bounties. Funds will be needed for any sort of progress. He then turned his eyes to Conan. You will focus on Sasori of the Red Sand. He is a master puppeteer that has even turned the late third Kazekage into his puppet. He has a well-established spy network and his resources could be used well. At this knowledge, both figures nodded in response before Pine questioned him. And what of you? Toby released a short, low chuckle before answering. I have two prospects in mind, but they are both quite young for now, both originating from the Hidden Leaf Village. At those words, Pine and Conan seemed to tense their bodies, before quickly returning to a neutral stance. Noticing the slight tensing of their muscles but choosing to ignore it, and spoke on. In fact, I have already led one of my prospects away from their village. He was in need of training materials, and where he went, not even I am capable of reaching. That seemed to stop their thoughts for a moment. A place not even Madara was capable of reaching? They could only imagine what that place must be like. There is no telling what kind of resources he may be able to provide for us, and that is a gamble I am willing to risk. From his background though, I am certain he will become an asset like no other, and I'm positive he will not be returning to his village. I made sure of it. At that moment, his Sharingan seemed to spin very ominously, as if to say he was in control. It was something that seemed to bother Pine. Pine would become the god of the world, if only to grant it an everlasting peace. Madara in his eyes was only a tool for his goals. From Toby's eye, space began to distort, engulfing his entire body. They both still have a long ways to go, but I am positive that they will both join the Akatsuki in due time. I have things to check, so I will be leaving first. With those final words, Toby left in a twist of space, leaving nothing but the air and rain in his wake. To him, they were all pawns. Puppets to be used for the grand scheme of his plan. He was setting events in place and controlling them by the wire, and the show has only just begun.